Sanvinani Dumilan, good evening and welcome to episode 353 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. As the Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast, we join us for the first time. Welcome to the family. You're tuned in to the only daily property talk show in South Africa, catering to your property needs. And to all our regular viewers on Facebook, on Instagram, as well as on YouTube, welcome back. You know how we do it. Every single weekday, you and I have an appointment. We're always tackling a property issue and always having, somebody who's a property expert who helps us make better property decisions. And I think if anything, today is a Friday. It's been raining in Joburg. We finally have the first, summer rains. And of course, a lot of our robots in Joburg are also, unfortunately, not working. It's actually talking to my guests and the team behind the scenes that, look, we're now there. But we're here, a few minutes later than we typically are. And then one of the great things, of course, that you can look forward to as it is Friday and you're getting ready for the weekend are also the other great shows that you're able to catch across Private Property's social media platforms. As it is a Friday, you can catch the Home Shoppers Show with Chad that comes to your screens every single Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Mbali brings you the Farming Podcast. And they're now running a great series, the gardening series, that you can look forward to very regularly. And I think that's one of the things that so many of us would probably want help with, especially now that the rains are here and, probably want to spend a bit of time in your garden. And on Wednesdays, Esty Claassen brings you the First Time Home Buyers Show, where she's always in conversation with people who have gone and grown their property portfolios from strength to strength. And of course, we are running a great competition here on Private Property where we get to give away 500 rands in cash every single evening. And all you have to do to stand a chance of walking away with that is comment on the pinned post on our Facebook page. And you also have to watch us live. That's really the only catch with how to claim the money. You have to watch your name, then you need to drop us a message to claim the prize. It's that easy. And if we don't have somebody who claims it, the money goes into the money bag, and the following day, it just keeps growing. So later on, you'll get a snapshot of who's potentially the winner of that 2,000 rands that is in the money bag. And imagine starting off the payday weekend with that 2,000 rands. I know some people are saying that, look, the money that we got on Friday, the money we got last week, it's almost like really was the September salary supposed to last us up to this point. So if you want to make sure you win that money, make sure that you stay tuned, and should we call your name, drop us a message. This evening, we're talking about something that I absolutely love. I was even saying to my guests, we're looking at settling legal disputes between landlords and tenants. And I think this is one of those things. I'm a landlord, I've been a tenant. And one of the things about sometimes even being a landlord is you might be a landlord and also a tenant. And sometimes you might be a residential tenant or even a commercial tenant. So really, a lot of us always need to find ways of understanding some of these disputes and how to settle them. And today we're going to be looking beyond even settling them, really also just getting a sense, what are some of the typical disputes that we generally get, and how do we sort of go about rectifying them? And also, how do we make sure we prevent some of these disputes? Because we tend to find that more often than not, these things are avoidable. And to help us get a better sense of how we can go about doing that this evening, I'm joined by Liad Hadar, who's a director at Hadar Incorporated. Liad, good evening, and thank you so much for coming back on the show this evening.
Azama, thank you so much for having me.
It's only a pleasure. I think, Liad, before we even look at the settling part, right, I think that's sort of the second aspect. What would you say are some of the typical disputes that landlords and tenants would have? Because I think it's great to just first get a sense of what kind of disputes are we actually talking about.
There's so many, but I think the basic ones I can think of at the top of my head are utility disputes, overcharging for water, electricity, or anything else. Other disputes are with maintenance. For example, tenant says, I've got a big issue with the maintenance matter. It could be a light bulb. It could be that simple, or it could be something as major as a geyser. And there's dispute as to who's responsible. And just there's a number of disputes that are practically faced by landlords and tenants day to day in their relationship.
when you started with the utility one, part of me was internally screaming, because I think it is unfortunately one of those things. When I think about how rates went up and utility bills kind of went up, I think it was 2-3 months ago. And it's a shock, right? It's a shock to tenants, and even as a landlord, because you live somewhere. So even if you're living in a property that you own, you've also seen your own utility bill go up, and sometimes you think, well, maybe I'm being mischarged for it, and I know that tenants would be like, there's no way that this is actually my charge, and that's how some of these things often start. Before we look at the settling part, how can we go about almost trying to avoid some of these, disputes? Because I think I can already think at the top of my head, a lot of them stem from, and I nearly said an OTP, but stem from a lease agreement, and some of the terms in the lease agreement, whether the one party didn't read it, and often sometimes, the landlord, the tenant. Before we look at how we should go about settling it, how do we avoid some of these matters? Because we already know not a lot of us, both landlords and tenants alike, can actually afford a legal dispute and having to get attorneys in. So what are some of the ways that we can use to, at the very least, avoid having to get to a legal dispute?
Okay, so for me, it's quite simple. First and foremost, it's having a clear and concise lease agreement signed by the parties. Now, there's going to be some amendments to the Rental Housing Act soon, which will make, hopefully soon, it's been a while now, but which make a legal requirement to have a lease agreement reduced to writing. I think it's critical. I think that's good form anyway, and good practice to have that done anyway. But the major reason for that, for me, it comes down to intangibles, which is understanding of your responsibilities from both sides. So if it's a clear and concise lease agreement, and for example, it says, although it doesn't usually, but the geyser is the tenant's responsibility. It's not usually the case, but let's say it did say that. This particular deal, that's what the lease says. It's very easy for a landlord to refer back to that and say, listen, tenant, I understand your issue, the geyser's burst, but look in the lease, clause 3.1.2 says that it's the tenant's responsibility to maintain and replace the geyser. It's a ridiculous example, of course, because the geyser is usually done by the landlord, but you get the gist of it. If it's reduced to writing and signed by the parties, you can pretty much agree anything you want. So that's number one, clear and concise lease agreement signed by the parties, and you can always refer back to it. The second thing, it's hugely important, transparency in the relationship and in the communication. So for argument's sake, when a tenant asks you or has an issue with a utility dispute, as you said now, utility charge, the first thing you need to do is communicate. The landlord that's charging you, it's the municipality that's charging the landlord. Yeah. You just pass it on. In fact, it's actually unlawful to make a profit on electricity and utilities in any event. So all I'm saying is that shows great transparency. If you can attach a great communication, if you can attach the invoice, for argument's sake, from the municipality, and that's one of the key things is transparency and communication, because it leads to diminishing of the distrust element in the relationship. So those are my top two: concise lease agreements and transparency and communication.
And, Liad, I think one of the things that we do underestimate when we are tenants, I think I'll wear the tenant hat for a little bit, is we generally just have that sentiment that landlords are just out to make money, make my life difficult, and overcharge me for certain things. And so even though we know that rent is this amount, so the fixed costs are this amount, the unfortunate thing with utility charges, especially when they're not prepaid, is that they do fluctuate. And more often than not, when you do see that increase, your immediate assumption is, oh, they're trying to make a quick buck out of me. And sometimes it kind of starts there, right, where you have that perception. And I know we tend to have it. It's not just a South African thing. Almost all over, a lot of us just seem to feel landlords are just out there for blood. But when you see the figures, as you say, when you actually say, oh, snap, this is actually coming from, COJ or whoever, let's say if it's from the, complex, this is the amount that's coming through. I think even you as a tenant realize that, okay, this is not my landlord trying to, be malicious or make a bit of, money from me. And it's such an important thing for us to be able to do, because unfortunately, we're not used to having those kinds of relationship with, our landlords. It's usually just that love-hate relationship. It's almost like, the relationship with the tax man, where, you just kind of have to do this thing, but you don't need to kind of be friendly with them. So I really like that transparency becomes a good thing. And I hope the landlords are listening, because sometimes it even goes to when you start the relationship with your tenant, start it on that front. So don't even wait for the part where they end up complaining, because one of the realities is more often than not during, when we approach the winter season, that's when some of these bills also tend to go up. So when you've been sending that from the get-go, they know that if winter comes and suddenly the electrical bill goes to 2,000 rands, you're not suddenly being transparent because you're trying, you're kind of saving face, but you've been doing it from the get-go. And I want to find out from you at home, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, have you had certain disputes, whether they ended up being legal disputes or you were able to resolve them before getting attorneys in the mix? How did that go about? And I really want to hear from both landlords and tenants some of the issues that you may have had with your tenant or your landlord and the different ways that you went about resolving those issues. Do share with us down below, whether you're watching us on Facebook, Instagram, or of course, about settling these matters. Let's go for a quick break and see who that potential lucky winner is. And that lucky winner this evening is Tshepo Stephen Makupo. Tshepo Stephen Makupo. Hope you're watching. 2,000 rands is up for grabs right here on the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamandungwa Khumalo. This evening, as we look at settling legal disputes between landlords and tenants. You have until the end of the show, Tshepo, to grab that 2,000 rands that is in the money bag. And of course, I'm in conversation with Liad Hadar, who's a director at Hadar Incorporated. Now, Liad, and if in the unfortunate event where, whether you're a tenant or a landlord and you do find yourself in a matter where you're now having a legal dispute with your tenant or your landlord, what are some active steps should you be taking? Because I think the reality is more often than not, the one party, typically the landlord, is the one who would probably, know to go to an attorney first, as opposed to it being the tenant who does that first and would know whether it's served, whether it's a letter of demand or whatever kind of legal document that gets served. What are some of the do's and don'ts, especially in the early stages of a legal dispute between, a landlord and a tenant?
Okay, Zama, so now I can speak quite openly about the fact that I represent pretty much 95% of our clients are landlords. So I'm very centric. I'm gonna give you a bit more information about that. We litigators, right? Litigators like to litigate. That said, I incorporate a very different type of law firm. We look to settle as a for the first call because we feel that there's much more value in that, not only for our clients, but in fact for the tenant as well. And the entire relationship. There's an element of fairness and justice in it. So I've got many thoughts on it, and you'll never, I think, regularly or often hear from a litigator who's dissuading you from litigating and going against the business model, right? It's quite silly. But I think I said this last time I was on, but I really genuinely mean it. I think that there's so much more value to our clients as landlords in settling the matter amicably. Now, here's the main reason for it. And I just was reading a Harvard Business Review article earlier today. In America, legal disputes and litigation cost $20 billion to the major corporations. $20 billion a year to major corporations only. It's not the whole country. And the reality is what this report is talking about in the Harvard Business Review is it's not just the money that you're spending on litigation, but it's having key personnel also being kept busy in litigation, going to what they call their depositions and what we would call in court here, I guess, court hearings and everything else. And consultations and whatever. So you're not only losing financially on legal fees, you're losing a lot of time, and angst is added to the equation. Now translate that now from a corporate to an individual landlord, it's amplified by that much more. You're an individual landlord with one property, right? And you've got a tenant in place. Not only are you incurring legal fees, you're already anxious and feeling upset about the tenant and the situation. So your blood pressure is through the roof. Your health is being affected probably. But you're also spending a lot of time on it. And you probably at times, unfortunately, and I've seen it with individual landlords, you become besotted almost. You can't let go of the matter. It takes over your entire day. It takes over every thought you've got, and you just feel this anger all the time. And I'm saying, trust me, as a litigator, do not litigate. I mean, it's crazy. You can use that as a headline, I guess. As I say, business planners will say to me, what kind of businessman are you? But I'm telling you now, it's a good thing to do. So after that long summary on it, I must tell you a personal example. And it literally happened to me in the last week. I've got actually a tenant came to me for one of the 5% that happens. Came to me. They've got a company in a commercial office. It's a commercial / industrial. So they've got an office and a warehouse in there. And they came to me about 4 months ago with an issue with the landlord. And the landlord I happened to know, and I thought they'd be reasonable. So I said, guys, you know what? Let's sit around the table and let's not litigate. You're on the cusp of litigation here over R1 million. That was the arrears that accrued after lockdown and everything else. I'm not going to mention clients' names, of course, for confidential purposes, but the one company is in the alcohol industry and the other one's the landlord. And obviously they were heavily affected by the restrictions and the bans being in the alcohol industry. So I went to the landlord with them and I said, okay, guys, instead of litigating because you guys are at each other's throats, it was quite a build-up of animosity. I said, let's try to settle this matter. I know both of you and I think we can settle it. I think they both looked at me quite strangely and saying, well, why are you considering this approach? And I just said, I can guarantee you long term, if we can resolve this matter and you sign your new lease for 5 years, which is the intention, and avoid litigation, you'll both be happier for it. So fortunately, they both gave me a chance and they listened to me and we mediated of sorts. It was informal mediation where I listened to both sides. I'd listen to the tenant, I'd listen to the landlord separately, and then I'd try to come up with solutions. And we had a few back and forth. In fact, it took 4 months. And I can tell you as of this week, we signed the lease and everyone is as happy as they can be in the circumstances. And when I tell you we were on the cusp of some serious litigation, I'm not joking. I wasn't going to ever get involved in the litigation side of things, but they were about to go at each other. It would have cost them both hundreds of thousands rands in litigation fees. It would have not helped either of them to concentrate on their core businesses. The landlord to have a tenant in place and collect rental, and the tenant to operate and try to run a business at a profit. So it's testament to the real power of settling matters. And that's why I said in my topic is settling is a sign of strength. It's not a sign of weakness, what people think it is, generally speaking. So that's my story on why settling is actually a better thing for you.
And Liad, as we've been saying, it's strange that a litigator would say don't litigate. And I know that it was also just something that you had said the last time you were here. But I think it actually speaks because some of my best friends are attorneys, and even they typically would say, try to not litigate, try to, whatever the matter is, don't go to court. We can send letters, but really the core of it is, let's have a sit down. Let's see how we can manage this dispute outside of court, because those things can drag. Plus, with it being COVID, it will probably drag even longer. The cost of it is actually so high. And I think when we look on the residential side, is both parties usually just cannot afford that, right? Not just the tenant, but even you as a landlord, for the most part, cannot afford to end up in a long legal dispute with your tenant, who by the time you probably even see court is now no longer your tenant. So I think the very first big thing is the aim should be that you're not going to litigate. You're not going to get to court. Try to resolve it as early as possible. And so, Liad, we're in the event where we now know that we're not going to be litigating. We want to be able to settle, get in the boardroom with both our attorneys. Then what kind of tips would you share with us when we're in that space? Because I think the reality of a lot of those kinds of disputes is one party sometimes may feel very heavily aggrieved and still want some kind of recourse or remedy. The other party might think, well, I actually didn't do anything. I shouldn't have to be, whether it's, paying X amount. So what are some of the do's and don'ts when we then find ourselves, in that particular space where we're very clear that we're not going to try and, take anything to court because you're a normal tenant in a residential property, and you're also a normal landlord who's probably got, a few properties in your portfolio. So both parties, from a financial perspective, certainly don't have the means to want a drawn out thing. What should we be doing and not doing when we're now looking at resolving and settling that matter in an attorney's boardroom, for instance?
Okay, so I'm going to say something as equally controversial as don't litigate, coming from a litigator. But I'm speaking now from 11 years of experience in residential evictions. I'm talking to the landlord right now. And a residential eviction is a very costly process. You're looking at least 18,000 rand in legal fees, plus sheriff's cost and a few months of not collecting rent. Once you've gone to war, you've gone to war. Don't expect the tenant to continue paying once you've decided to try evict them. So it's going to be controversial, but this is a very practical tip I've got for any landlord. Offer the tenant money to pay a deposit elsewhere. And I'll tell you why I say that. It goes against my grain, and it also goes against the justice in this world, right? Someone already owes you a month or two worth of rental, and you're saying, here's money for you to go away. But just hear me out for a second. If you don't do that and you go to war, the reality is you're going to be incurring those legal fees I just spoke about. You'll be then having a matter heard within the next 3-4 months until you get the eviction order, let's say, with the person actually evicted, 2, 3, 4 months, and you won't get rental for that time. That's going to cost you much, much more than offering someone 7,500 rand, let's say, if that's their rental, and say, here's the money, go and pay a deposit somewhere else, and please get out of here by the end of the month. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but trust me again, from experience only and from seeing the pain and not wanting to see the pain, that going legal and having the legal fees rack up and the time that it takes to evict someone, 2, 3, 4 months, it's much more painful than that initial horrible sting of paying someone 7,500 rand to leave, if that's their monthly rental. Trust me, you'll get them out if they agree to the deal, obviously. You'll get them out quicker and cheaper. Mm-hmm. Again, it goes against business model of a law firm, but take this as your free advice for the year. And if you can resolve matters like this, please do. Mm-hmm. The only time you should go litigate is if a tenant is really being unreasonable. If you as a landlord are being very reasonable and a tenant being very unreasonable, to the extent that they won't even take money to leave, then you have to litigate and the gloves are off. Then you're welcome to come to us and the clause will be out and every other sort of phrase I can use, we'll use against these guys, But try, be practical and try get the quickest possible solution for your own sake. Forget their sake, forget your ego and forget all the angst inside of you and the anger. Just get the result as soon as you can. That's one practical tip, Zaman, that I can give you. And that's probably my number one tip for eviction issues between clients, because it also gives the tenant the out. You say, tenant, you're unhappy, I'm unhappy. Here's money to go somewhere else as a tenant. You're not happy here, go there. And I'm going to help you on your way. I promise you that if you do that, hopefully one day, if you're a landlord listening to this and you've had the troubles of evictions before and you know it's costly, you know it's time consuming, you'll hopefully thank me when you've successfully done this kind of settlement in a matter and realize that you've got your property back earlier and you can start renting out to a more suitable tenant for your sake.
Liad, one of the things I appreciate about you is you're not a typical attorney who's, I'll say, out for let's see how many clients we can get in as much as possible, because you also understand the fundamental big picture. I think when we look at tenants in certain matters. Certain matters really don't need to even get an attorney involved, right? Yes, there are certain instances where we absolutely have to, especially as you're saying, when you're dealing with unreasonable tenants, but others, and I've never, fully and completely in arrears. And so giving them that kind of out certainly does help substantially, because they're thinking, how am I going to then, find another place where I'll probably need to pay that $7,500 as a deposit and a first rental up front, and probably be somebody else's problem. I'd rather just stay here. And I know that the landlord can't suddenly, you block my services or whatever the case is. In the event where you then are dealing with an unreasonable tenant and you have to litigate, and this is particularly for landlords, what are some of the things that you should not do in that process? And already I hinted on some of the stuff that some landlords unfortunately do, where they think I'll block I'll switch off water and electricity, whatever the case is. But once you now know, you're going to an attorney, you're going full on litigation, what are the do's and don'ts when you're now in that process and your attorneys are now handling the matter?
Okay, so Zama, once you go legal, then what I would say is take a step back. Trust the professional you've gone to, especially if you've gone to a property law specialist. And hopefully you have, because it's a big mistake in my mind if you don't. So once you've gone, trust the professional, just like you would a doctor who's performing heart surgery on you. It's not as drastic, but it's like your equivalent of your investment lifeline. You need to step back and let the professional take care of it. It's easier said than done, but try relax and try understand that it's now under control and it's going to be handled. Don't do anything unlawful, anything silly. I got a phone call, as you would imagine, as a landlord's attorney the other day, and the landlord's representative said, okay, can we lock out now? And I said, absolutely not. I said, but they said to me, will it hurt our case? And I said, to be honest with you, it won't hurt your case. So when we bring the eviction application or the rental collection, it will not hurt our case theoretically. But what it will do is make you act unlawfully, which means that the tenant, and this is advice for tenants, because I'm actually absolutely pro tenants not being locked out and unlawfully, you can go to court and get a spoliation order against the landlord. Now, landlords also need to be very concerned about this, because not only can you get a cost order against you in a court application, which can be substantial and cost you a lot of money, but also it's actually a criminal act in terms of the Rental Housing Act. So you just got to be careful. I mean, I don't know anyone person who's ever been prosecuted criminally for, breaching the Rental Housing Act, but it's a concern. You don't want to be the first guy or girl that gets prosecuted criminally in that regard. So just be a bit wary of that. Actually, very wary, not a bit wary. So let go, let a professional handle it. Do not do anything unlawful. And if you can, this is a do right now, try to be reasonable with your tenant and try to communicate with them still and say, it's gone to my attorneys. I don't want to have the anxiety. I don't want to have the emotional approach to it, because it's with them now. But if we are able to settle this thing amicably, maybe I can write off some of your arrears and I can let you, off the hook for some of it. Please, would you commit to leaving by a certain date? That's something the attorney can then pick up on and reduce to writing and have signed by the parties by way of a settlement agreement. So I'm not encouraging you to go chase the tenant after you've gone legal, but sometimes that the fact that it's gone legal is that extra push for the tenant to take you more seriously as a landlord. And I would then capitalize on that and say, okay, there is an attorney on board, but you can still settle the matter amicably directly with the tenant if you want to, and the attorney will confirm that in writing to be made a settlement agreement.
And getting some of the comments and how long sometimes the justice system will, resolving certain things, the court route takes, you would know that you probably don't want to find yourself, in that space. So you really do want to make sure that you settle outside of court as much as possible. And I think, Liad, the really big thing, and I've never heard it anywhere with different guests and even different attorneys, the option of giving the tenant that the rental amount and be like, you can go find a place elsewhere. That's a tip that I'm certainly going to carry with me, because we often, I think, as landlords sometimes think, well, I've already lost out on 2 months worth of rental. Why should I have to stay with this person? And not understanding the longer term part is that if they then decide to stay 4 more months, and obviously raking up, not just the rental. So if they're living in a place where the utility charge is not prepaid, they're also raking that up and potentially even damaging your place. Because we also know that, unfortunately, tenants who go into arrears do tend to leave the place in a slightly undesirable way. Is it not rather financially better for you to give them that amount, blame it on the game, write it off, and that within a week or 2, you're able to already put your apartment up or your property up and get a new tenant. Liad, before I let you go, any final tips for our viewers at home when it comes to settling a legal dispute, whether they're a tenant themselves or if they are a landlord?
So, Zama, I just want to touch on what you just said. I think you're seeing a bigger picture, and I love that. You're understanding that it's an infinite game, not the finite game, where there's no full-time score here. You're looking to create an asset that's worth something in your property, and you've got to look long-term. And I just want to touch on that point of paying, the controversial point of paying a tenant who's in arrears to leave. Just do the maths, guys. I mean, it's very simple. As a landlord, you've got a tenant who already owes you a month or 2, otherwise you wouldn't be doing any of this, right? So you're already in, let's assume the rental's 5,000 Rand a month. You're down 10,000 Rand plus potential utilities. And let's say you go legal and the person digs their heels in, and even if they don't oppose it, they just stay in the premises. You're looking at 3 months worth of non-rental again. That's an extra 15,000 Rand on top of the 10. That's 25,000 Rand. Then you're looking at legal fees. Let's round it up to 20,000 Rand. So now you're looking at 45,000 Rand before you potentially have your tenant out. Compare 45,000 Rand, as much as it hurts, it's a bitter pill to swallow, against 7,500 Rand paying someone to leave. Even if you add the current arrears of 10,000 Rand, it's 17,500 Rand versus 45,000 Rand, and you get your premises back almost immediately, as you say, maybe 2 weeks. You've got to think bigger picture. You've got to think that settling is ultimately the better results for you. Pride aside, ego aside, principles aside for now. Principles cost money, is what they love to say, and it's very, very true. You can go after them, you can sue them, you can do anything you want, you can get judgment against them. There's no guarantee you'll get your money back. And when you evict them, there is a guarantee they'll get evicted, because I've got a motto in our firm, it's a question of when, not if. We will always evict someone, just how long will it take? But that time period and those costs are just not worth it. So in closing, my final tip, in addition to that tip of paying 7,500 Rand, whatever the monthly rental is for them to leave, is to think strategically about every single matter as a landlord. If you want to save money and time and anxiety, settle matters, settle them quickly and settle them fairly. And to the tenants who are out there, trust me, you're lucky that you're not getting a letter from our firm or a summons or an eviction order. Take that money and run. Trust me, it's better for you long term. It doesn't affect your credit rating that way. You won't have judgments against you. You won't have all the anxiety yourselves of being sued and have been dragged to court. So it's good for everyone. So be fair to each other. Be open-minded to settling. Egos aside, principles gone. Settlement and quick resolution to matters is the big win for everyone.
Liad, I love that. Settle quickly, and the big one, settle fairly. And I think one of the big things as a landlord in particular is understanding the fundamental long-term view when it comes to real estate. It's not just that one tenant or that one property and those 3 months. If you've got that asset, that you might be looking at holding on to it for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so when you take that long-term view, that 7,500 Rands is really a drop in the ocean in the grand scheme of things. And I think, if anything, if you ever find yourself in a legal matter, certainly do go to Hadar Incorporated, because one of the things that you're going to be guaranteed is that they're not going to be pushing litigation in as much as it would make business sense for them. But we'd be looking at how do we resolve this quickly and fairly. And as a landlord, that would certainly be something that you are looking out for. Liad, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's always such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Zama. Looking forward to the next time.
And that is Liad Hadar, who's a director at Hadar Incorporated, wrapping up the Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Khumalo. And unfortunately, Utepo Makupo has not, dropped us a message down here below, meaning Monday, the money rolls over. We're going to have 2,500 rands in the money bag. Well, it is my time to go. And of course, I'll be back on your screens on Monday evening at 7 p.m. You can look forward to the Home Shoppers Show with Chad this evening at 8. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Are you interested in growing your property portfolio on an international scale? Then this online event is specifically designed for you. The South African Property Network and Wealth Migrate have partnered up to introduce Sapin Global Invest, your ideal source of safe and secure offshore property investing, offering better annualized returns of up to 10 to 20%. We invite you to join our upcoming virtual event hosted on 6 October 2021 at 6 to 9 p.m., where you can find out how this platform enables you to create real wealth with offshore investments today. Learn how to diversify through international real estate deals, how to hedge against the rand and mitigate your potential risk, how to create real wealth with offshore investments, what co-investment opportunities and deals are available right now, and how to stay up to date with the latest deals. Register to attend and secure your ticket for only 99 Rand 99. Simply visit the Private Property Facebook page and search Sapin Global Invest. More details will follow, provided in the comment section.